Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone who's joining us today. Again, welcome to our session From Chaos to Control, Learning Content Management at Scale. Our presenters are Heidi Milberg, Julyan Lee, Chris Tompkins. My name is Kim Heyer. I'm with GP Strategies, and I am your host and producer for today's session. So before we get started, I just want to cover a few items for you. Within 24 hours, we will be sending out a link to the recording in a follow-up email. It'll be coming from my email address, so keep an eye out for that, and it'll have the recording and the slides for you and some additional resources. And even though everybody's lines are muted, we always want our time together to be as interactive as possible. So we encourage you to contribute to today's webinar. So if you do have any comments in the presentation, make sure you add them to the chat feature, and then you can chat with and engage with our presenters and our other attendees. And if you don't have access to the chat, like I said, feel free to raise your hand to acknowledge a question that's out there, or you can use the Q&A feature to add any of your comments in there, and I'll be happy to help you with that. So, and then again, I want to thank everybody for joining today's session, and I'm just going to introduce you to today's presenters. So our presenter today is Heidi Milberg, and she is GP Strategies VP of Learning Solutions. She was responsible for the growth and development of global managed learning services with oversight of strategic global client relationships. She has over 25 years of experience designing, implementing, and managing learning outsource solutions. Our second presenter is Julyan Lee, and he is a certified change management practitioner with over 30 years of experience successfully delivering change solutions to a broad spectrum of clients across multiple industries. And finally, Chris Tompkins, he's the VP of Business Development for Rustici. Sorry, software, a company that provides software and to improve capability across L&D ecosystems. He's an expert in the standards like SCORM, XAPI, and CMI5, and he has over 20 years of experience matching the right technical solutions to our clients' needs. So first of all, I believe that's over 75 years of experience, so we have a lot going on today. And we have a great session planned. So with that, I am going to hand it over to you, Heidi.
Perfect. Thank you. I want to say that all of us started when we were babies, so we'll leave it at that. Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. We're here to talk about learning content, and not in terms of the effectiveness of the learning or how you're delivering it to your learners. We're here to talk about how some of the ways organizations are overcoming the challenges of managing their learning content. As the title of the webinar implies, for many organizations, content management has gotten out of control. So how did we get here? One of the ways and one of the key contributors is the evolution of ways organizations design and deliver their training. And we've come a long way in a short amount of time. We've seen a significant shift from in-person training to e-learning, and due to the pandemic, somewhat forced shift to virtual learning. And also a lot of organizations are restructuring their learning into bite-sized, blended, and digital learning approaches. So this variation of ways learning can be delivered has complicated the management and maintenance of learning content. Another factor is the evolution of learning technologies, which has provided incredible efficiencies and improvements to the learner experience, but it's also causing challenges. A continuous evolving set of tools and this desire to constantly innovate has created a complex learning technology ecosystem, as you can see represented on the slide. And it's making it more and more challenging to manage content. If you're not inundated every day with emails or calls from solution providers, just attend an L&D conference and you'll see hundreds, if not thousands, of new and innovative solutions. Another key element that's adding to this chaos is the ever-changing ways learning organizations structure themselves and how they operate. Too often they shift back and forth from one approach to another to go along with leadership changes and sometimes with new strategies. Hey, Chris, I know you want to chime in here.
Sure, yeah. Thanks. So we're going to do a little bit of interactivity here. We're going to put up a poll, and I want everyone to just take a breath and think about how many pieces of software, how many tools, how many PowerPoints, how many reports do you really deal with at your organization every day? Everyone thought for a long time that we'd have one LMS to rule them all. And at the end of the day, you put all of your learning in this one spot, you run all of your reports from this one spot. How many people use one tool? I think often, and Heidi, if we could advance one slide here, we look at the individual components of your learning ecosystem. And sometimes we're focused on content. Instructional designers love the latest authoring tool, the latest product, the latest off-the-shelf library, but they also train in PowerPoint and PDFs and videos and a bunch of other things. We always think of the systems as being sometimes 80% of a team's budget for their learning platform. Yet the LMS is also supported by an LXP, and we also train in person, and there's a badging and credentialing program at times. That gets a little weird. It's not one tool to rule them all. And then finally, I think the most valuable part of any ecosystem for learning and training is the data that comes out of it. And often those reports live in 3 or 4 different places at a time, and understanding the nuanced relationship between one and another can be hard and challenging. So the first step for understanding the chaos that you live in is to audit how many systems, how many pieces of content, and how many reports do we use day in and day out. Heidi, I think you're always focused on driving those impacts. Tell us a little bit about how people are using all these tools to get what they want.
Absolutely. You know, before I'd be really curious, actually, Kim, how did we look on our poll?
Oh, I can speak to that. So 41% of the people have 1 to 5 tools, 6 to 10. We got about 30%, about 8 people on the call, and only 1 claimed to have more than 20. We're going to go push on that a little bit, but that's a great range for these type of goals. And it's a question I ask a lot of people, and we kind of keep a scratch pad of these results. So you guys are kind of contributing to a hive mind here, and I'm grateful.
Absolutely. And again, it's you know, thanks, Chris. There's a lot of chaos out there. The technologies are certainly contributing to that. And again, you know, when you look across all of the things I talked about, I don't know which is really more, which is the bigger factor, but we're going to continue to see these changes happen, and we're going to continue to have to evolve and address how we're dealing with them. So as the organizations are focused on navigating this evolution of the delivery methods, the technologies, and those organizational structure changes, really the learning catalogs have grown somewhat unmanageable in some cases, and they're creating challenges that have really significant business impacts. So I think we could take just a few minutes to spend on some of those impacts, and I'd like to start with the learner experience, because many of the companies I've been working with, they're focused on improving the learner's experience. They understand that the learner experience can have an impact on the effectiveness of learning. And the way content is managed and the quality of the content itself can be a key contributor to the learner dissatisfaction. For example, when you have a large and poorly managed content catalog, it can make it difficult for learners to search and find training in the LMS. Oftentimes, course titles might not be intuitive, or even worse, there might be a lot of redundancy, making it difficult to kind of identify what's the right training that they need. Sometimes versioning is unclear. And this is really the first point of interaction that the learner has with the learning. And then add to that, if the content's outdated, if it's inoperable or it's no longer relevant, then it's even more impactful, especially if the learner spends valuable time actually consuming the learning and they don't find it useful. From a content maintenance perspective, this is kind of a no-brainer. The more content you have, the more difficult it's going to be to maintain. It can be challenging to identify which courses need to be updated, when they need to be updated, and what specific content needs to change. It can be even more challenging to determine then, is the content relevant? Is it accurate? Or is it still needed? So without an effective content management and maintenance approach, you often have, it leads to those redundancies, to inefficiencies. And as we mentioned before, it can impact the learner experience and the overall effectiveness of the learning. Large and poorly managed content catalogs, they also create challenges when it comes to mobility, content mobility and interoperability. And as organizations implement new technologies, they integrate third-party learning catalogs, or they shift from one technology to another, they inevitably run into challenges with interoperability. And a lot of times they don't figure this out until late in the project, which then can result in unanticipated costs and project delays. Chris, I know you're intimately familiar with content interoperability and a lot of the challenges I've shared so far. I think you can chime in here.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, interoperability isn't a word that makes me the most interesting guy at a party, but it is the intersection of all of these different technologies, whether it's an authoring product, an off-the-shelf library, your learning management system. Rustici really just helps two e-learning companies play nicely with one another. We're the save as button behind the scenes in authoring tools. We're the player behind the scenes in a lot of learning management systems, and we have a lot of distribution tools. Those are the only three things that we do. So we learn a lot about these lines on the screen, the places where content needs to work with a system, the places where systems need to report to larger things. That's the interoperability in the industry. And while I love SCORM and AICC and XAPI and all of these weird acronyms, most learning professionals don't really need to be an expert in those tools. They just need to be sure that they're using compatible standards and make it easy to connect these things in ways that make it stronger, faster, easier, better. So rely on the fact that we know a lot about these standards so that no one on your team has to become a SCORM expert. I promise it's not that interesting. But if we look at the real ecosystem, Heidi, and advance one more slide, it's not one learning management system to rule them all. To bury the lead a little bit, in the research we normally do, organizations of size typically have more than 25 when we start to consider what are the real pockets where your learning and training ecosystem exists. Learning management systems, training management systems, third-party systems, you're learning in an online resource over here, you're watching videos over here. We have these old PowerPoints that are important on day one. And when we start to really audit how many pieces of learning and training technology are at an organization, it's typically over 25 at the end of the day. And I don't know why it is this way, but no LMS tends to report on that holistic view. Often instructional design teams live in a silo, compliance teams live in a silo, different training or performance teams live in a silo. And I think the real ecosystem is a bunch of pockets of learning and training, and teams struggle and waste a lot of time working with one another. As an example, most learning management system administrators seem to have 47 other jobs. I don't know why that is true, but I see Heidi laughing because, yeah, the LMS admins are often stretched thin, and getting a report that shows a content team the efficacy of a specific course can sometimes take weeks or months. And so having all of these barriers around each one of these modalities of learning is a real challenge. And Heidi, I think you talk about breaking down those barriers all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I did laugh when you talk about the learning administrators, because as Chris knows, we actually oftentimes are the pool of learning administrators or LMS administrators for a lot of our clients. So we certainly recognize the challenges there. You know, perhaps one of the most significant business impacts, and you just sort of alluded to it, is the barrier it creates to transformation. And I look at all of these things we're talking about in terms of these technologies, new ways of delivering learning as transformational efforts, and the effort, time, and the resources it takes to bring content under control in order to shift the content when new technologies are being implemented or integrated, can in the end be a deciding factor as to whether the organization can move forward or not, or how effectively it can move forward. I would love to know, I know we've covered a few of the challenges and impacts of content chaos, but I'd really like to hear from you. So what are some of the impacts and challenges you've been experiencing that maybe we haven't covered? And feel free to share your comments in the chat. And I love, Chris, you know, I'm looking forward to having you share a little bit more about, you know, sort of the technology side of this as we move through, and we're looking at how organizations are sort of addressing some of these challenges.
Oh yeah, I have some sharp tools to show you here in just a
Yeah.
second.
Awesome. Well, Kim, I'm not sure if you can let me know if there's anything that comes in. I'm not able to see it, so.
Heidi, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Those are some of the big themes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and especially as we start hearing things about AI and start experimenting with it, that is absolutely something we're hearing. Decision paralysis. Yes, yes. I've worked with a lot of organizations that are in the process of making decisions around their learning technology ecosystem, strategies, things like that. And, you know, too many of them, first of all, take a long time. And a lot of them end up sort of in that paralysis and don't make the decision. So there's a lot of challenges right now in terms of technology, and it's continuously changing, and it takes a long time to implement. So oftentimes it's a tough decision. And back to how we talked about org structures or org models from a learning and development perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That also has an impact in the decisions and some of that paralysis. Difficulty to migrate content and data when changing tools. Absolutely, we are going to talk about that. All right, well, thank you all for sharing with us some of what you're experiencing. So let me move on here. So we've talked about a little bit of how we got here and some of the impacts of out of control content. As we shift how organizations are addressing the challenges, we've separated the discussion into 3 segments, and there's, you know, so much that can be shared, but we're trying to focus here on integration and migration, management and maintenance, and change management. So from an integration and migration perspective, before we jump into the slide, I see here, Kim is right ahead of me here. We're launching a poll here to get a sense of the transformational efforts, specifically those listed on our slide, that you currently are or have been experiencing in your organizations. And as I mentioned recently, we've been seeing many companies are undergoing some form of transition or transformation where there's a need for content mobility. They may be looking to consolidate or harmonize content from multiple LMSs to one LMS. They may be implementing a new LMS and need to move their courseware from, you know, the current to the new LMS. They may have acquired a company and they need to move the newly acquired company's content into their LMS. Or they may have purchased a library of content from a supplier and need to integrate it into their LMS. How are we looking here? I'm getting a sense here of what we have on the poll. Looks like we've got people, organizations across the board going through each of these activities, which is exactly as we've been experiencing. Perfect. Well, so integration and migration projects, they're difficult on their own. And they become more and more challenging when you're working with content that is unmanaged, unused, and outdated. So you've all heard the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Most of the time you wanna, when you're migrating or when you're integrating, you're setting up a new LMS, you wanna have clean information. It's also, you know, the perfect opportunity when you have these big projects to do this, to get your content under control. I'm going to switch us here. So traditionally, there are 3 activities that are done in preparation for migrating or integrating content. Evaluation, cleanup, and rationalization. And how these activities are done and who has the responsibility is often influenced by how L&D is structured. I mentioned that a little bit before. For centralized or federated learning organizations, the project is often led by a central L&D function or an owner of the LMS. While decentralized learning organizations, they often rely on IT to lead the effort with support of the various learning functions. The evaluation of content is really focusing on identifying what's in the catalog, determining what should be in the catalog, and then also determining what actions need to be taken to prepare the content for migration. And the first step we often see is really looking at the data or pulling some basic data. Usually it's from the LMS, and it would include information like when the content was created, when it was last updated, you know, content creation date, update dates, hopefully some utilization or completion information, and if you have it, even some satisfaction, learner satisfaction or that kind of data can come as well. And what that does is it provides really just a big picture of the level of effort that's going to be needed to prepare your content for the migration or the integration. It also can identify some initial actions and decisions that may be needed. So, for example, there's an organization I worked with that needed to migrate their content from one LMS to a new LMS, and their current LMS had been in place for over a decade. They had about over 150,000 learning items in their LMS that they wanted to migrate, and they wanted to make sure that what they were going to be migrated into the new LMS was going to be relevant and accurate and basically aligned to their learner experience and accessibility standards. And when they took the data from the LMS and got some of this basic data, one of the things that they found is that nearly 50% of their learning items had 0 completions associated to them. And then actually further, almost 80% of their content had less than 25 completions. So one of the first things they were able to do is make a decision about, you know, are we going to migrate 50% of this catalog with no completions? And it really helped to, that quick kind of decision helped to, significantly reduce the level of effort for the migration. While that data can provide, that big picture on the content, it really falls short in terms of assessing like relevancy and accuracy and alignment to L&D strategy. And this is typically where the process gets bogged down a bit. And what most organizations do is they will try to divvy up or sort of parse out the content. You want to get now a little bit more granular into the content. And so you parse it out into the functional areas or directly, preferably directly to course owners, who will then take on the work of assessing, evaluating the specific content, and to make decisions and recommendations about sort of the actions that need to be taken, whether they are still relevant, whether they need to be updated, and what has to happen in terms of getting them ready to migrate over. So essentially taking that big picture of the data and then having the input at the individual course level provides that a view of the level of effort you're going to need to clean up the data, and the actions become more clear. So let's talk about cleaning up your catalog in preparation for the migration. It's time consuming, it's resource intensive, and it can be costly. So to simplify some of the effort, companies are leveraging automation wherever possible. And for example, we often develop scripts or APIs to update LMS information systematically. Programs can be run to perform certain actions based on specific criteria, like you can make a broad decision to deactivate courses, or you may identify missing information and even update the missing information. Essentially, that automation is going to significantly reduce the level of effort and the manual time needed when you're working across really a broad and large catalog. And then in addition to cleaning up your content, a best practice is also to rationalize your content. Sometimes this doesn't happen, but I want to say, in terms of, being a best practice, what the rationalization is about is really focusing on looking for redundancies and consider alternative learning offerings to better align to your learning strategy, or to improve the learner experience, or to reduce cost. A number of years ago, I worked with an organization that we went through a large global content rationalization, and I was amazed. We found 40 courses that were focused on project management training. And what was even more interesting is that there were 4 courses that were actually the same course provided by the same supplier, and they had 4 contracts, and they were at different price points. So again, it's looking broadly at the catalog. We're not just looking at what you have and what to migrate over, but it's also looking at what you have in your catalog more broadly and how you're delivering it to the learner, and is there a way to cull it down to be more manageable and more effective. I love this. In terms of updating the content itself, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least make mention to generative AI, since I don't think there's a single webinar right now in the learning space that isn't focused on it. On this slide, you can see an example of how we're using AI to parse, restructure, and recreate content. And its value goes beyond just preparing content for migration projects. It's also being used as a transformational way to design, develop, or recreate content to meet kind of new learning strategies. And there's a lot of talk about shifting to role-based or skill-based, and relooking at content and restructuring it. So AI is really being used, it's being piloted to do that, to really minimize the effort. This example is high level, obviously, and the details are more technical than I am, but there's been a lot of buzz, as you know, and excitement around using AI in learning. And if you're interested, and if you're not aware already, GP has on our website, we have a resource center, and I'd highly encourage you to join that AI resource center, where you can get information, insights, updates, and even resources. Kim, I think there you got it. She put it in the chat for you guys if you're interested in. While we're on the topic of the transformational approaches and innovation, Chris, I know you're itching to chime in. Can you share a little bit more about how Rustici is helping clients really address the challenges that we've been discussing around integration and migration?
Yeah, love to. So one of the key things in the mapping of that whole ecosystem is, what if we just go where the play buttons live? There are a lot of systems that have the triangle button that let a specific group of learners launch a assigned set of assets. And often those are the gatekeeping applications to really delivering things. It's hard to deliver a piece of training when you need to track it. If you're just handing someone a PDF and you hope that they learn, that's fine. But most organizations need the green check mark. They need the metrics. They need to understand what's happening. And so trying to corral all of your learners into one play button can be hard. So what if we shift that and just understand where your audience lives? Sometimes it's an organizational LMS, but often with groups that are on this call, there are a set of third-party contractors that have their own LMS. There are a set of extended enterprise people that need to train on your material, but in their own system. And that extended enterprise is often a moment where you're making learning assets, giving it to them and saying, hey, have a nice day, good luck. But your team never gets to see how they're being used or build a better mousetrap because you are giving them assets that aren't evergreen, that will expire and have almost no management around them. So organizations with extended enterprise, or publishers themselves, if you're just selling a line of business that is content at times, going where the learner lives often means giving up insight and control. And that doesn't have to be the case. All of these weird e-learning standards that I know so much about make it seem like, oh, you've got to publish a file and give it to them in their system and leave, but that is not true. There are additional capabilities. When we look at all of those challenges at once, Heidi, if you could advance this one for me, we end up in a situation where not being in control of the play button puts an administrative burden. LMS administrators are often stretched thin as it is. Asking them to update a course every month for you can be hard to just get their attention, let alone have the efficacy of implementing it in the right way. You can't turn off things. So if you give them a sensitive piece of content in their own LMS and then you don't have that partnership anymore, they still have your content. And that can be a problem. NDAs often stretch 3 years past the relationship to protect this moment. But what if that didn't have to happen? What if you could turn off the light switch when that relationship is over? The disparate learning data. I can't tell you how many federal systems we've touched that only support SCORM 1.2 over here, but the content creators made SCORM 2004 over here, and there's nerdy reasons why we can't get the learning data where it needs to be. We can free that up. It doesn't have to be that siloed. And there then becomes gaps in support. So who does what, who can report on what, and even if the interoperability for standards exists, sometimes LMSs just don't write a report that shows you every question, even though I'm very confident they have that data in their systems. So being able to see some of these things, to reduce the burden, to have an on and off switch, to update remotely, to combine reporting into one spot, and to close the gaps of what some of these technical tools can do are challenges that Rustici helps people meet all the time. You'll go one more, Heidi. I'm a guy who doesn't enjoy working hard as much as I enjoy sharpening my tools. A friend of mine once said if he had 4 hours to cut down a tree, he'd spend the first 3 sharpening the axe. And I believe in that. So some of the ways that Rustici does this is to centralize it all in together in a tool that we call Content Controller, which is very sharp. It's clever. It allows a content team to put all of the content they're authoring off the shelf, all the libraries that they're buying from partners, all of their videos, PDF assets, give Content Controller all of your learning content. And then we kind of cheat. We know so much about all the e-learning standards and all the LMS players in the world that we distill all of that live content out into whichever e-learning content type works in the play button that you're targeting. This allows us to mix and match standards. This allows us to set license limits, expiration dates, seat caps. It allows a team to do advanced things like language support and update the course every day if they feel like it, with all of the other LMSs connecting to that live course in near real time. What this does is it allows us to reach that play button, to work with that LMS administrator, and then do whatever we need to do gently without having to call them again for an advanced report, without having to call them to update a course, and without having to call them to manage a different version of a language. This type of approach, by putting Content Controller at the middle, means that authoring tool teams, content teams, compliance teams, learning administrators can all do their jobs uninterrupted, but have sharper tools to work less hard. And I think that any time, especially in this climate, that we're working more efficiently, we're being a better steward of the resources. And while Content Controller is often driving, hey, we just want an on and off switch for this piece of content, what it does is it helps the big group work within their existing ecosystem with no changes to anyone else's day-to-day jobs. And that gets exciting. So I know that you can't drive those changes without good management. And Heidi, I think it's back to you and Julyan to talk us through how you guys normally walk those processes to use an advanced tool like Content Controller.
Yeah, Chris, thanks. And when I've met Chris a number of times we spent some time over the last year, and he shared information about Content Controller. And while I know we talk about a lot of technologies and new ways of doing things, this one really hit home, and I was really excited to have him share the information and be part of the webinar, because I think it really provides an innovative opportunity, an innovative option of how you might control and manage content. So we're going to get into management and maintenance. We shared information about ways organizations are getting their content under control, which, as we just talked about, usually is prompted by a major integration or migration project. Sort of, you have no choice. But to minimize the level of effort or the need for future cleanups and rationalizations, a content management and maintenance solution needs to be put in place. So I've worked with a few companies that have gone through significant pains and expense to clean up their content catalogs. They've evaluated them, they've rationalized them, they've cleaned up their content, and reduced the catalogs to programs that were just relevant and necessary, only to end up back where they started a few years earlier. And in working with them and speaking to them about why it happened, there are three things that were clear. There was a lack of governance. There was a lack of consistent processes for intake and maintenance. And there was minimal or no change management. So we're going to talk about these. Let's talk about governance. We know that an organization's L&D structure and operational model will impact how L&D organizations or how L&D policies are defined and enforced. A centralized L&D organization, they often have complete autonomy to set and enforce policy. They typically have a strong connection to their business customers or the various the business functions, and they do their best to create a policy that balances the need for effective content management with unique business needs. For federated learning organizations, while they typically have some level of control over certain elements of L&D, like learning technologies or corporate programs, they usually aren't able to set and enforce enterprise level policies around learning. And then decentralized learning functions, they tend to have the least interest or incentive to support and abide by an enterprise policy. But what we found is that most successful learning organizations, regardless of the way they're structured or their operational model, they establish an enterprise body, or a lot of times, some of them call them like enterprise learning councils, to ensure that they have representation across the organization, across the business. And some of the key things that an enterprise learning council will do is they will sometimes create strategy. So I think about things like a content strategy. Some organizations have content strategies that set a philosophy or guidelines on when you would maybe build content versus when you would buy content off the shelf. They use learning councils to align on major L&D investments like learning experience platforms, content controller, LMSs, and they also will help to define policies and enforcement methods for policies like what we're talking about, content management. For example, for content management, a way in which they might enforce a content management process or maintenance process is restricting the front end of putting content into your learning catalog. And that might be by restricting, access to individuals to actually get the content into an LMS, or it could require, approval process and sign off and things like that. And it's ultimately to ensure that what's going into the catalog meets the standards, expectations, ensures there's no redundancy, and really keeps control of the clean content that you have. The best content management approaches, they have consistent processes for intake and maintenance. Traditional processes are usually manual, they're resource intensive, they typically are constrained by the availability of resources, and therefore oftentimes that's why your content sort of gets stale and isn't updated. And we've worked with companies to introduce ways to minimize the effort. Transitional ways that we're improving maintenance processes is by leveraging automation and even data integration. So one example is integrating HR data with LMS data to identify course ownership changes. So as people move within an organization, course owners can change. And unfortunately, most LMSs don't get updated and you end up losing that connection to who the course owner is and who's responsible for maintaining courses. So by leveraging an integration of HR data and LMS data, we can identify course ownership changes. We can trigger notifications and reminders to ensure that a new course owner is assigned, rather than finding out sort of late in the game when a course needs to be updated and you don't know who the new course owner is and you have to look around for that. We can also trigger notifications throughout the maintenance process in terms of, when a course needs to be updated or when changes need to be made. Usually those are triggered by, specific update dates or different fields you can use in an LMS or tool that you're using for like a content controller. But thinking, more transformational, of course, when content gets updated, similar to what we talked about for preparing for migration. Again, AI, course owners are starting to use AI as a way to review their content, restructure, or update their courses. So certainly something that is going to continue to be tested out and utilized, I think, in the future. Chris, you spoke about content controller a bit, and certainly we talked about kind of thinking about it from a interoperability and just a really cool tool to get control of your content. But I know it also improves, management and maintenance of the content. You spoke a little bit about that, but I wonder if you can just share a little bit more here.
If you roll back one slide, I think it's a good representation of content controller's approach. The idea is that content controller would store the course, the full version, and the people building it, the people managing it can change it almost daily to fix spelling mistakes, to advance the content. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, we have 3 different learning management systems, 3 different play buttons to target. Maybe it's internal, maybe it's hybrid, maybe it's external or extended enterprise. And once content controller puts its proxy file, a typically 10 kilobyte SCORM 1.2, SCORM 2004, AICC, whatever the LMS is accustomed to, whatever the LMS administrator prefers, we put that proxy file in there. And once that connection is established, the content team can do whatever they want. They can update it as they need to. They can follow governance rules. They can meet the mission. They can see what's going on inside of their own courses, regardless of the versioning that's happening almost daily. None of the LMS systems need to really know or care the progression of content, and decoupling those two things gets us to a really good place to help live in an ecosystem. So if we look at content controller itself, it's a little tease of a screenshot. I feel very strongly that content teams that can study how their content is being used can build better content in near real time. Elizabeth, you asked, is content controller the same as a content management system? I mean, yes and no. Content controller is a unique piece of technology. There aren't a lot of competing products in this space because it is so agnostic to what the content is, and it's so agnostic as to where the LMS needs to play it. We can inbound 15 different types of e-learning content. We can also connect to custom content that's not in an e-learning standard at all. It can connect to AR, VR, XR, and do a lot of really interesting things because the people passionate about the content itself have different needs than the learning management system administrators. And this helps give both teams exactly what they want. So Content Controller can be a single source of truth for what LMS is supposed to have which pieces of content. Content Controller can be a single source of truth for how is everyone on the planet across 5 different LMSs engaging in this one course. Oh, no one ever got question 3 correct? I feel like a team should be able to intervene after learner 30 instead of learner 300,000. And Rustici has helped change management and help be efficient with wasted time and reskilling and retraining when we just had a simple mistake. It can help test and preview content. However the course plays in the little pop-out window inside Content Controller is exactly how it will play in any LMS. Think of the reduction in testing and quality control when you only have to test the course in one spot and not in Moodle, in Cornerstone, in SuccessFactors, in a different LMS. Often testing teams can reduce their testing burden just by putting it in Content Controller and having the confidence that if it plays and tracks here, it's going to be fine in whatever that LMS is. It helps organize a content library so that the content team isn't drowning in files. Tagging, foldering, bundling, and giving specific permissions for specific teams to manage specific folders helps content teams collaborate in a single space and save their sanity. No more, oh, did you send this version on Tuesday in my email? It all lives in Content Controller. There's versioning and change logs, and you can publish and test at any time. It gives everyone a single place to explore, including with subject matter experts that might not know anything about content at all. And finally, it supports almost all the formats. I would love to rattle them off: SCORM, AICC, XAPI, but the list is quite long. I promise if your team has an asset that is delivered through a computer, Content Controller is probably compatible with it in some way, shape, or form. We'd love to take a look at that with you because it's a vast tool. This is a Swiss Army knife that I think almost every content and compliance team want to have running quietly behind the scenes so that we reduce all of the complexity of changing these systems in the hopes of efficiencies. Julyan, I think you deal with change all the time, and I'm excited that you're here.
Absolutely.
Because this is the tool that helps make this go. So tell us a little bit about how you use it like this.
Yeah, I'd
Awesome.
actually, Julyan, we've talked about throughout this organizational change, transformation that's happening. I even mentioned how as one of the challenges, right, one of the contributors to failure of that content management effort that was done with a few different companies I've worked with, change management is such a critical component. And so I wanted to make sure we have an opportunity for you to, you understand this deeply. I'm hoping you can share with us sort of the approach, how we see it, and how it's a key part in successful transformation and change.
Absolutely, Heidi. Thank you very much, and Chris, thanks for the lead in. The one thing I want to acknowledge here, I saw in the chat where I think it was Ellen mentioned that managers, administrators, and others feel stress when their routines and their tools change. That's anxiety. Those are the things that people feel when change occurs. So it's important for us to understand exactly on this slide, what exactly is change management? How do we understand what people go through when these new technologies come in and how it affects their day-to-day lives? If people have been using multiple systems all these many years, you mentioned that, Heidi, that you had a client that's been using something for over the last 10 years, and you go in and you centralize and you change the way that they do their day-to-day tasks, then that causes anxiety and people do resist change. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So let's talk through exactly what is change management. Typically, implementations are project driven. So the project management, I want to compare project management to change management because most of us know exactly what project management is. Project management is about getting that system ready for the organization. The change management is the converse of that. It is getting the organization ready for the system. And we do that there's an art and a science to making that happen. So there's a smooth transition to the new way of being, going from point A to point B, and achieving those business results. When technology is implemented, it's typically done because there is some strategic reason for that to happen. There's a ROI, there's a goal for that to happen. So the change management piece allows us to make that smooth transition from point A to point B by implementing change management solutions that help people get through the transition from the old way to the new way. Next slide, please. All right, why do we need change management? A lot of times, change management, and I'm gonna get on my soapbox a little bit, Heidi. Change management is often overlooked, what's the word I'm looking for? Underutilized, and also just a lot of cases, people don't see the value in it. I like to put this slide in almost all my presentations because it shows that if you do a change management effectively, there's an ROI tied to that. This analysis of this survey, this case study was done by the McKinsey Group, and they did a survey of 40 different companies. All types of different change initiatives were going on: mergers and acquisitions, technology implementations, LMS implementations. So they went to these 40 companies and they did a study. And they asked what the expected value was, and then they determined what the captured value was. And they attributed those to 12 factors in 3 organizational levels: senior managers, middle managers, and frontline staff. I'm not going to go through the 12 factors, but you can see them on the screen. If you have these components in place during change, there's an outcome that you get. And the boxes on the bottom show that 11 of the companies that were surveyed that participated in this case study, they had effective change management at all 3 levels. That means the senior managers were doing what they're supposed to do, middle managers were lockstep with that, and frontline staff did exactly what they were supposed to do at the time of the change occurring. They received 143% value captured. That's pretty extensive if you look at what you invest and what you get out of it. 7 other companies who had 2 deficiencies, maybe the middle managers didn't quite do exactly what they were supposed to do, had 129%, and so forth. As you go down the continuum here, you can see that the companies that didn't have effective change management did not get the results as they anticipated: 68%, 35%. And I typically ask when I'm doing this presentation a show of hands. Since I can't see your hands, just acknowledge that we'd much rather be in that 143% range, the 11 companies that had effective change management across the board. That's exactly where we'd like to be. So here's proof that if you have change management and it's done effectively, you get all the levels of the organization involved. There's a benefit to that when these technologies come into play, because when you start mentioning the word harmonizing, migrating, integrating, all that causes people's worlds to be different from the way that they do things today. Moving from one LMS system to another, all those changes, culture change, any kinds of strategic alignment, those things will cause people to react a certain way when change occurs. Next slide. Great segue. I set myself up. This is how I didn't need you this time, Chris. This is what happens when change occurs. Resistance comes in different forms, and you can count on it that when change occurs and people have been doing things for an extended period of time, that these behaviors will be exhibited. Now, we will have people to adopt the change and move forward, thank goodness. But what we often see is that people will actively resist change. They're critical, they're blaming others, they're standing up saying this won't work. Now, those individuals are kind of easy to deal with because they kind of got a target on their back. We know how to handle those individuals. Now, what happens when the passive resistance behaviors come about, and you don't see those a lot of cases, like what the visual here with the iceberg, 75% of that is underwater. So you don't see that when you're navigating the change, is that there's these pockets of passive resistance that must be addressed if we want to get the the bottom line impact. If we want to get to that 143%, we have to address these behaviors and understand that people resist change for a multitude of reasons. However, it's important for us to understand how we manage that resistance and we drive that change consistently. We do that by understanding this emotional journey that people go on, and that the effectiveness of your change management over the left side will determine how people move up this continuum. At the beginning stages, there's awareness and understanding. Well, I'm aware of this project. I'm aware of the changes. I'm aware that we're getting a system that will manage all our content. I need to know more. So what's the organizational reasons for this happening? And then I understand what's in it for me. And that's what we drive as we move towards acceptance. So people get an understanding of exactly what's in it for them when this change occurs. Standardization, less impact, all the things that people experience. You want to make sure that they move up that continuum towards acceptance when that change occurs. That's how you get to that 143. I'm gonna start using 143 as my moniker.
Yeah.
So here's some tactical ways we do that to make that happen. It's not magic. There's an art and the science. The art is the way that we engage with our clients and the way that we engage with our projects and the individuals that are going through this. The science is what you see on the screen. It's the tactical ways that we drive people through change. The leadership alignment and governance. Communications is vitally important. Stakeholder management, understanding what people are going to experience and how to help them make that transition. The impacts of the change, doing that detailed analysis so you can get to the what's in it for me, with them, as we call it, type understanding. And then establishing these networks. We can't drive change externally. It has to be done within. So you establish these change champion networks. You assess those readiness checkpoints. If you saw that continuum, each one of those is a checkpoint where you determine if you're moving up that continuum effectively. And if you're not, let's do some course corrections, figure out where the gaps are, and close those gaps through some of our change interventions. And then the resistance management, passive and active. Let's determine what we need to do to close those gaps and ensure that people are making a transition. And then finally, the change adoption, right? We have to have a mechanism for people to use the technologies, to use the systems, hold people accountable for using those technologies, and put those adoption metrics in place so we know we're moving towards that end state goal of that 143% that we're looking for.
Julyan, awesome. I'm telling you, I don't do a single project with my clients in helping them when they're looking at transformation without ensuring that change management is part of the effort. Just have a minute.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, we just have a minute here. So to summarize what we've shared today, so getting control of your content is important for learning effectiveness, operational efficiency, and organizational transformation. Content management and maintenance strategy is necessary. You need strong governance, policy, a defined and enforced policy, and standard processes to keep your content in check. You should consider non-traditional methods like automation, AI, and, as you saw, an innovative technology to minimize the effort and cost of migration and maintenance. And you should not minimize or overlook change management, as we just discussed. And finally, you should remain focused on maintaining control of your content so that you can most effectively respond to changing business needs that are inevitable. So with that, I think we're at the top of the hour.
We are at the top of the hour. First of all, I want to thank you all today, the presenters, anybody who attended today, for your time and attention. Please take a minute at the end of today's session to take a survey. We appreciate any feedback that you can provide us for our webinars. And we hope you'll join us again. So visit gpstrategies.com on webinars to attend our upcoming webinars. So with that, I wish everyone on the call today a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.